Hello to Joe Meyer, the CEO and founder of ExecThread. Joe, thanks for coming along and speaking to us. If you would, give us a little bit about you and your background and about ExecThread.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rich. Glad to help. My name is Joe Meyer. I'm the founder and CEO of a startup called ExecThread. It's a 6-year-old startup that provides professionals predominantly at the executive level and C-suite with greater access to um, confidential career opportunities, VP through C-suite and board level, oftentimes jobs that are not publicly posted but are otherwise being worked on by executive search firms.
And what got you going with ExecThreads, Joe? Where did that come from?
Yeah, just my own, I would say, frustration as a candidate of not having access to all the jobs being worked on by executive search firms, and wanting, I'm innately curious and problem solver and entrepreneurial, and I saw a challenge there that I wanted to solve. So
And from what I understand, this is not your first rodeo. You've done this before, and so you have experience of taking company from inception uh, to sale. Can you give me a little bit of background there too?
yeah, and just to finish my thought on my last point, even though it was a challenge that I wanted to solve for myself and for the challenge sake of solving it, I knew that there were likely millions of other candidates that would like the problem solved as well, and that I was
Yeah.
probably not alone in the challenge that, or the frustration of not having access to confidential job opportunities. So I figured if I'd solve it for myself, I would be solving it for many other people too. But yeah, it's a good segue to this is my fifth, sixth startup, second or third as a founder, depending on how you count. Probably third. And some successes, some failures, some acquisitions along the way. So yeah.
Excellent. So I think what we're talking about is relevant, and you certainly can add some insight. As you know, and I think I've said this to you, Cofolio is all about empowering entrepreneurs. You go through your daily process of managing a company, managing people, empowering them to do the best job they can, and we're trying to help you guys, the folks that are at the helm, to give them more utility. And in doing that, I guess I want to try to understand where some of the challenges are for you. You're kind of at a mid-tier level right now. You've gone through seed stage, I think, right? You're kind of growing. What are some of the challenges that you're facing and you've kind of learned from over the years of experience?
It's a very broad, open-ended question that I can go a lot of different ways in. I guess maybe I'll try to answer it in a way that will make it easy for you to segue to what you probably want to talk about, which is, we are growing quite nicely at this point. It took us a few years to figure out who we wanted to be when we grew up, if you know what I mean, and
Mm.
how to make the cash register ring and how to scalably grow our network, which is now over 160,000 members, growing at over 1,000 members a day. Um, uh, but we are still very much resource constrained and still operating it on, what would otherwise be considered by many to be a shoestring budget. Maybe that's a legacy of having to extend runway and have our funds go as far as possible in those formative years when we were figuring things out. But as a result of that, we didn't have enough resources along the way and still to kind of do things properly, especially from an administrative perspective or from process perspective. Um, and we'll probably, not probably, but we will be finding ourselves playing a lot of catch up um, downstream as a
Yeah.
result. Um, so yeah.
And that That's something I've heard from some other entrepreneurs, and you know, if we kind of pick apart some of those being resource constrained, um, one of the entrepreneurs had said, you know, go as far as you can without raising capital. You know, just kind of until the point that you can't meet the customer expectation. You know, that's kind of uh, a come to Jesus moment for the entrepreneur. Is, you know, you have to, you know, you have to have enough to survive, whether that's being bootstrapped or what have you. But when you can't meet the customer expectation, then, you know, then you have to make some decisions. Did you find that same thing, Joe? Is
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I would delineate between meeting the customer expectations and figuring out how to make the cash register ring, i.e., how to generate sustainable, profitable revenue, because you could have a service where you are meeting customer expectations, um, but you still haven't figured out how to make the cash register ring. Um, and in some ways, that was the dynamic we
yeah,
had. Um, they're two. Sometimes they're one and the same, and other times they're two very different things. Um, you know, and especially in this day and age where a lot of new companies, new startups tend to take the free approach to offering their service in the early days. You know, I'll give it away for free, or I'll offer it for free before turning on the, charging for it. Um, it has to be a path to something. Um,
hmm
free has to be a path to something. And, if you are planning to offer free early on, or not focus on revenue early on, you better raise money early on to get to the point of, figuring out how to generate revenue. But if you don't raise money early on, you're going to need to figure out revenue much sooner than that. Um, so two very different approaches.
and they
Ultimately, though, you need to figure out how to make the cash register ring.
yeah. I think I learned early on that you know, there is that perception, price perception. If you offer for free, people tend to have the perception that maybe it doesn't have value. So you always have that pull, right?
Well, you also have the challenge that we kind of had a little bit is you do offer it for free, and if you offer it for free for too long, the persisting expectation is that you're going to continue offering it for free, and then when you start to charge for it, those early on members or users or customers who got used to free don't like having it charged to them now. So that that right inflection point is also important.
Let's talk about organizationally, as you know, because you're kind of touching on you know, making decisions as an organization to, you know, be self-supported to a certain degree. You know, get to profitability, which is critical, and knowing that your company can achieve that whatever level of success financially in order to sustain itself. How are you empowering and working with your key individuals to capture the correct KPIs in order to meet those expectations that you've set out or those goals that you've set out? Do you have a formula or a method?
Yeah. Um, we try to keep our KPIs bigger picture, higher level, and not as minutia. Um, you know, member growth, uh, cost of member acquisition, um, uh, revenue growth, profitability, cash flow, um, uh, engagement in the form of conversions, higher level metrics. Lower level metrics we're either not very good at uh, religiously tracking, and or you need more resources to be able to do it to that minutia.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when we need to track more granular metrics, we often do it more on a one-off basis, more so than a recurring process-driven basis.
And do you have to
And
take
that's
a
just a byproduct of one, not getting caught up too much in the details. Because if you get caught up too much in the details, you're not thinking bigger picture, and and what really matters and what moves the needle. And then two is, um, in a resource constrained environment, you have to pick and choose what you work on, and the minutia metric tracking is while it's important, it's probably not as important to those other things that my limited number of resources could be doing.
Is there are there systems in place to allow you to do that simply, or is that something that you're just kind of hand tracking and throwing into a spreadsheet?
Everything we do is trackable and is being captured in structured, automated, data-driven form. So anything we want to analyze, we can get the data for.
Okay.
Meaning the data structure behind everything we do is robust and detailed and structured. It's just a matter of getting access to it when we need it, and do we need it on a one-off basis to analyze something, or do we need and want to, or should we formalize it moving forward from a recurring automated perspective? But there's very little
so
data we don't have access to.
okay, and then to communicate some of those data points and some of your growth, kind of bigger picture things to your to your investor audience, because I'm sure you have quarterly meetings and other things that you have to do. Are there mechanisms or ways in which you're doing that today? How do you manage that process on top of managing your company?
Yeah. Also go back to the resource constraint part, when you don't have a lot of resources helping you with such data gathering or metric, tracking or report generating. Some of it oftentimes falls on you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so getting ready for board meetings, for example, is sometimes a not so easy process.
In what way?
Just from because we don't have a robust set of reports and because we don't have a humongous dashboard that tracks everything on a daily basis, it creates some challenges for us to pull information and data together when we need it, for things such as board meetings.
Do you get anxiety having been down that road before and having reported to and then ultimately gone through an M&A process? Does some of the needs of the investors give you agita, saying, crap, at some point in time, I've got to fill out this data room, or I've got to do multiple data rooms for different investors. And then if I go to M&A, I've got to repeat all this and manage all those documents that they're requesting. How does that kind of play into your psyche or as a...
I think there's two different things you're talking about. One is the ongoing expectations of your investors. It's really three different things you're talking about. The latter two are related. The former is not as related. So one is the ongoing transparency expectations of your investors versus the corresponding data and information you need to pull together for them versus the data and operating metric expectations of either future investors or acquirers. So, and a lot of this depends on stage and size of company too.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if an acquirer comes calling or an investor wants to invest, or you need to, you're going down the fundraising path, you kind of need to have your ducks in a row in advance of that, and or you need to be very responsive at the point the requests are being made and prioritize accordingly. And kind of a lot of other things fall by the wayside as a result. if you're not fortunate enough to have all your ducks in a row leading up to that point. Um, as it relates to current investors, I guess a lot of it depends on how vested and how engaged the investors are. If they're highly invested and engaged, then you need to be on top of things, reporting and process wise. If they are more passive investors for whatever reason, either because they're angels or because they've lost interest in the business for whatever reason, there's not as much need to be as maniacally on top of things as you would if you had, actively highly engaged investors.
Okay. In that process of let's say engaging those investors, no, let's put the investors aside for a moment, and let's go to the end game of all right, we have someone who says they want to acquire us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about those documents, like where would they be today? Are they, do you know where, like, because you've been through there and there's usually like 7 categories and about
Yeah,
80
yeah,
documents.
yeah.
Are they
So
someplace where it's easy to grab, or is that
I,
like a
I think it's dependent upon size and stage of company, to be quite honest. So I've seen 3 or 4 examples of this, all different size and stages. So like, if you're mid to late stage and you're already operating like a big company and you have layers in your company and levels in your company and departments in your company, and you have a CFO and a controller and a COO and a chief of staff and all this, like, in all likelihood, you're going to have your ducks in a row and you're going to have all that stuff centralized and
yeah,
in one, or at least readily accessible. Um, if you're not that, then, what I've seen is, companies that have access to all of their, let's just call it diligence materials, whatever they might be, financial diligence, operating diligence, legal diligence materials. But they kind of just, they're all findable, but they're just not all centralized or uh, easily and readily accessible. But they're all there somewhere.
yeah.
Either your law firm has them, or your finance manager has them, or they're sitting in, an executive's, you know, uh, hosted hard drive. Um, or in cases like ours where, we used to be making sure that everything was kind of, like that. But sometimes priorities that are far greater than that are take precedent, and things start slipping through the cracks. And then you're going to find yourself playing a lot of catch up if and when you need to. But the way I would look at that is unless there's a tool to make all that easy, which is a nice segue to what you're probably going to want to talk about, you need to prioritize accordingly. And if it's a matter of like running out of money next month, or making sure all your diligence materials are centralized, you're going to focus on what it takes not to run out of money next month. You know,
Right.
uh, so so again, it depends on size and stage and situational.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense.
But
Um,
if you could start having a process in place that was easy to adhere to and uh, uh, keep current with from early days onward, then that would negate such challenges.
which makes sense. And so I'm going to ask a yes or no question, but I know there's much more behind it, and you probably want to explain. But if I was to say to you, um, can you fundraise and run your company at the same time? What would you say?
Again, situational. The more support staff you have, and the more uh, um, support staff you have, and the more staff and infrastructure you have around you, the
Yeah.
more you can do that. You know, when you're resource constrained and, running on a shoestring budget or, operating in a spendthrift way, harder, but not impossible. And you figure out a way to do both. But do both in a way where you are prioritizing your time and your team's time, where you're, giving a higher percentage to one of those two and a lower percentage to the other one at various days of the week or weeks of the year, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, if somebody came and offered me, a large sum of money for, my current company, I would, uh, you know, prioritize my time to figure out how serious of an offer that was and whether it was worth pursuing. And if it was worth pursuing, then all of a sudden priorities for me and my team start changing and turning our
Interesting.
attention to that, right? In the absence of that, then you prioritize running your company and growing your company and scaling your company.
Let's talk about lessons learned. So, going back in time, are there, in terms of the very starting process, conception of company, developing MVP, are there things in that space that, either you would do different or you would say to an entrepreneur, here's what I can offer you in terms of advice or suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, they're all kind of related, and this is all early stage stuff, um, ideation stuff. So first off, ideas are cheap. A lot of people have good ideas. Very few people actually act on them. Two, just do it if you think you have a good idea. Just figure out a way to start offering the service or the product somehow, some way to prove to yourself and to others that your idea is actually a good one because somebody will use your service or use your product or hopefully buy it. Um, on that note, mm, offering something for free is a great initial strategy to try to get traction, but ultimately you have to figure out how to, generate revenue and self-sustain. So trying to figure out that sooner rather than later would be advisable. Don't be afraid to pivot after you feel like you've exhausted your initial path to monetization or path to product market fit. Give it some time, but don't give it too much time. Embrace pivoting if you need to, whether it be revenue model wise, or go to market wise, or product fit wise. And then when you do have product market fit, or you do figure out how to make the cash registering, then double down on that and figure out how to make it ring faster, how to make the flywheel go faster, how to optimize it, how to enhance it, how to scale it. That should drive all the focus from that point onward. Like I've said many other times in this call, it's situational and it's stage dependent.
Sure. And that makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate the perspective, as people are starting businesses, there's always going to be challenges there. But like you said, everybody has some ideas. If you don't act on it, you'll never know. And you need to figure out how to, A, make it acceptable, but then also B, make it ring the cash register. And I think that's a great point. And you've repeated that on this call. And I don't know if enough people really understand that. Ultimately, it's nice to have something out there, but if it's not churning enough cash to sustain the business, to grow the business, then it's really not a business.
Correct. You can't pay yourself or other employees, so or your vendors.
That's right. And in terms of your key employees, at this point you've grown a little bit, but how do you ensure that they're input is received? Do you have like weekly meetings to get their contributions, to understand what's going on in their departments? What's your methodology for kind of keeping them engaged in the growth of
Yeah.
the company?
Yeah, we have a weekly stand-up meeting with our team. We have a number of smaller, you know, calls and or, you know, Zoom calls, what have you, you know, with smaller groups of people. Um, we leverage the hell out of predominantly Slack more so than email. Email is less of a tool than it used to be, um, fortunately, um, and for internal communication, that is. Um, and a lot of one-on-ones in terms of not like formal one-on-ones. Oh, I'm going to have my one-on-one with my manager this week. Not that type of one-on-one, but instead just a lot of, you know, one-on-one conversations via either Slack or quick Zoom calls. Like if, to get clarity, just jump on a quick Zoom call, have a 5-minute chat. Good. All right, I'm good to go. Let's move on. You know, um, so very fluid.
And are you totally virtual at this point, or do you still have offices?
We've been virtual since good 6 to 9 months before COVID. We went
Okay.
virtual, not because we predicted COVID was coming, but for other reasons. So we've been virtual for no less than 2.5, closing in on 3 years at this point.
And that's worked out well for you? Happy about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have people throughout the world, both full-time, part-time, project-based interns and contractors, and everything in between. Yeah, it, it's great.
That's awesome. So I know your time is valuable, Joe. I really appreciate you being here today, giving us some insight. If we were going to wrap, and as we said at the beginning, Cofolio is all about empowering the entrepreneur. And
Mhm.
if you were speaking to a room of entrepreneurs, what's the one thing you would say that you think would empower them to, take a step forward and to do a little bit better with their company today?
Well, that's another very open-ended question. Again, like I said before, a lot of it depends on are they, are they founders or entrepreneurs of going concerns or not, and if they are, then what size and stage of going concerns. But at the end of the day, um, regardless of whether you have investors or not, or whether you have a board or not, or whether you have shareholders or not, it's your company. It's meaning like you don't own 100% of it in all likelihood, but you know the buck stops with you, and you have to make those hard decisions even when people don't agree with you. And you have to do what you think is right for the business, and you can't please everyone. So,
I think that's a good piece of advice right there.
mhm.
And very true. I know from my experience as well. Well, Joe, is there anything else that you want to be specific on? I know we've talked about a lot broad topics, which are great for me and what we're
Mhm.
trying to accomplish here. And so I think what you've shared is absolutely tremendous and very appreciated. Was there any place that you wanted to go or have a conversation about, or
No, only thing I would say is, thanks for having me. Hopefully, someone is listening to whatever I'm saying and takes something away from it. And then two is, I heard from you kind of the pitch of Cofolio and kind of the path you're going down, and having some sort of central repository from the early days onward to centralize all of the diligence materials that you would need either for future investment or for a future M&A event, or other liquidity event is, well, seems like there's a need in the market for that. It seems like a service I would be inclined uh, to embrace early on. Wish I had, from the early days of my company onward, and wish you all the success in getting it off the ground and offering it up as a solution for entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs alike.
well, thank you very much. I mean, we're super excited about it. Our MVP launches here in another few weeks, and of course, we're going to get it out to you and to our other entrepreneurs who have been helping us with these videos. But the real I think the crux of what we're seeing the need for is that, how do we get people started as soon as possible in building organizational structures for their data and their documents that make sense,
Yeah,
that eliminates a lot of the burden later on at
yeah,
different stages,
yeah.
so
That
that
makes
it becomes aggregated and then it distributed when you need it to be distributed. So,
totally.
um,
I think that makes a lot of sense. The only thing I would add to that is if you could think about the use case in which people are playing catch up and didn't have the opportunity to use it early on, and is there a solution that GoFolio provides to those use cases and those types of companies that are flying the plane and have been flying the plane for a while and have a
yep,
lot of catch up work to do? Can it still be leveraged in those use cases? You don't need to answer that now, but if we're going to be a guinea pig for you, which I would potentially embrace, that's the situation we're in. So
absolutely. We'll definitely talk about it. I think we have solutions. So,
awesome. Cool.
well, it's great to see your face, my friend, and
Yeah, you as well.